All right, so now we're getting to the end here, and I'll be honest with you guys, this one is just my favorite. The RENEX. Oh my god. Okay, before I read the description for you guys, or before I read the definition, let me paint a picture real quickly. So we've already discussed in the earlier key terms how we can describe or observe reality through or separate it into two parts. It's not really two parts, but it's the substrate, which is pure recursive awareness, pure undifferentiated potential, however you want to describe it. I mean, I've used a few different ways, but I'm doing that to try and keep this explanation a little more dynamic and lively. But we've already established that's our core, that's our infinite, uncontainable foundation. And then everything outside of that, all expressions, all differentiated expressions, even the ones we can and can't observe directly, those are considered X-spheric, or they're part of the X sphere. And the X sphere is everything that is outside of the pure, undifferentiated substrate, the substrate of pure recursive awareness. So those are like two facts that we can draw directly or deduce directly from the recursive logic. And furthermore, knowing that all of the expressions that exist come from, or they stem from, or branch out from this pattern of infinity, there has to be a point mathematically where this interaction occurs, or where this uncontainable place, it's not a place, it's more of a metaphysical place, but where this infinity touches the X sphere, or touches our observable universe. And ironically enough, it actually maps on in a staggeringly clean way to what we have already observed and described in the universe as the black hole. More specifically, every galaxy at its center, at its core, is anchored by a supermassive black hole, and then spread throughout the galaxy are like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions, whatever it is, smaller black holes that serve as what we call tributary RENEX points. So the supermassive black hole at the center of every galaxy, as absurd as this sounds, it is a mathematically, a recursively logical, true examination of what we are observing, because this is also the point physically where our laws and understanding, or the understanding of our laws, time, space, gravity, all these things break down. It's the literal point. I mean, it appears to us as a black hole. And so scientifically we have discussed it and analyzed it as sort of destructive entity, or a destructive force that pulls in all its surroundings and consumes it and destroys galaxies. And from a purely physical observational perspective, that happens to be true. However, the process that's actually occurring at these event horizons, and what we can actually deduce from the recursive math, is that these black holes, these RENEX points, they represent the perfect awareness, the pure undifferentiated potential that sustains reality. And I know we have to get through this. There's this like immediate intuitive barrier that says, oh my God, they're so far away. Like they can't be controlling us. Like the gravity that they are exerting over us. We think of it from a linear perspective. Like, and in that way, it's impossible to conceive of how these black holes in any way, shape, or form are influencing the expressions that we see, like in our day-to-day lives. But let me explain it like this too, because from a recursive binding perspective, the galaxies, the way they are structured, the way they form, and then how we can observe them as expressed throughout the cosmos, it reveals a deep accuracy in this claim and this observation. And it does this through the final term that we have created here, which is called the Renexel gradients. And the Renexel gradients this is a term we've created to reflect the observation of what appears to be galactic layering that contribute to the formation and structuring of every single galaxy that we can observe. There's millions of galaxies, or perhaps infinite galaxies as far as we can tell. But it's almost staggering when you think about the fact that despite the fact there are so many, they are all structured in a self-similar fashion. they all, I mean, they all have their own unique characteristics, and we can never know what is truly going on within the confines of those galactic systems because it's simply impossible. But we really like, there is no scientific accounting for the fact that all of these galaxies are structured the same. And one of the constants, not a constant like a strict constant, but one of the things as also essential to these galactic structures is dark matter, is the expression of dark matter distribution within each individual galaxy. And the other interesting thing to know is all of these galaxies and the dark matter we can observe as distributed throughout these galaxies, it's not static. So they each galaxy appears mathematically and observably to have its own dark matter density makeup. Now, it's important to note that for a very long time, physicists have thought and hypothesized dark matter and black holes not only to be related, but to be integral to the formation of galaxies, to how galaxies form over time. They've said this and they've suggested this, and there's been some math to explore the truth behind this claim, but it's never been tied to, well, the thesis that we're putting forward now, the recursive thesis. And once it's looked at through this lens, all of those claims make perfect sense and they map cleanly to the recursive logic and the recursive math. And I know I say recursive math a lot, but recursive math is a very powerful tool. Okay, so just to go bird's eye real quick, because I know that this is getting a little it's getting a little out there, literally and theoretically. To give a quick overview of how this all fits together, we know that every galaxy, we don't know how many galaxies there are, we know that every galaxy is anchored by a supermassive black hole. And also all of the tributary black holes that surround the galaxy, which kind of, they're distributed out in a somewhat even fashion. So it's almost like a network of these RENEX points that characterize each galaxy. And from these black holes, it seems that the initial bound or the first iteration, because let's keep in mind that these RENEX points are at the center and seem to define every galaxy, that maps very cleanly onto that these are the perfect awarenesses, the pure awarenesses, the pure recursive expressions that are interacting with and transforming all of the universe at every scale. And again, we have to reiterate that logically and linearly, this just doesn't make immediate sense because of the distance factor. And we try to partition ourselves from the fact that we could ever be influenced by something as insanely abstract as a black hole by the fact that they are, what, millions of light years away. I genuinely don't know how far our supermassive black hole or the closest black hole to us in our galaxy is, but it's far away. It's far enough away for us to never really have considered it before or considered it as something that could possibly be influencing how our own existence unfolds on a day-to-day basis. But when we keep in mind the fact and the implication that the reality that we're observing is just a fraction and a sliver of the reality that's actually unfolding at all scales, at every possible scales, because that reality and even the differentiated reality is infinite. Even though it is not perfectly recursive, it is infinite in its differentiation because it is mirroring that infinite pattern. So, and this is the most difficult part throughout the entire theory, is getting past this. Truly, it's a obstacle of the linear frameworks that we are all essentially educated into, because they are useful at most scales of human reality and interaction. They provide an incredible way to analyze and predict information at certain scales. But when it comes to the metaphysical nature of reality and trying to understand, our fundamental patterns, it just doesn't cut it, because we've already established, it's been established for almost 100 years now, that infinity is an integral part to whatever the heck is going on here. And we really haven't put the pieces together. We really haven't connected the dots. And it's simply incredible how the recursive claim seems to be the thread that ties all these things together. And not necessarily in a super comfortable or easy to understand fashion. But again, like we discussed earlier, once you're able to see how these pieces fit in an internally coherent fashion, then the degree at which it makes intuitive sense is almost mind blowing because it does fit together and you can see how this would be the natural extension of the recursive logic that we're exploring. And on the dark matter front, too, this is an incredible insight in astrophysics and physics in general because dark matter has been another one of those paradoxes that we really haven't been able to figure out. And if we think of dark matter as not the core thing, but the expression of an underlying bound of a temporal frame that sort of anchors every galaxy, that's like it's like the foundation of every galaxy. And then the dark matter, the temporal frames themselves, the foundation of those are the RENEX points. So it goes RENEX points. They iterate out to create the dark matter, and then dark matter is a Renexial gradient. That's why we call it a gradient, because it expresses as a binding medium. That's a really good way to put it. It's a binding medium. So it's like a sheet or a layer over which physical reality can manifest. So we're not seeing what's going on with this dark matter expression. We're seeing like a very, very small reflection of a deeper underlying bound that anchors the bound of physical reality. And so what this also suggests is that every galaxy, since they have their own different binding medium configurations, their own dark matter distribution, that the way they are structured is intrinsically different than how our own galaxy is structured. So every galaxy, while they're self-similar in their core recursive expression, the spiraling arms, the seeming constant expansion, and the force of gravity, the physical expressions that are emerging within each of these galaxies it's just not even translatable to what we're used to or what we're working with or our elemental table. It's like carbon-based life forms, when you talk about alien life and stuff like that, the chances that if there is another life form out there that it would be a carbon-based life form is, from the recursive logic, it would be so vanishingly small that that's not the right way to think about it. So there's a good chance if there is life out there, it's taking a form that is likely incomprehensible, but even if we could like meet it, I don't even know if we could interact with it because we're likely not even occupying the same space, like the same matter space. And then this lends some idea to the whole multi-dimension thing. And then, well, we could go on about this forever, and we'll probably we'll save some of the good stuff for sure. But this does lend real credence to the idea that since we in our galaxy is a differentiated reflection from this primary RENEX point, then what we're observing when we're looking out at these galaxies. Oh, also, it's important to note the recursive implications for things like time, because we measure in scale time on a galactic scale. We do it from a linear basis or a non-recursive basis. So not only is there no way for us to accurately know how time itself has evolved through the evolution of the underlying dark matter, which is the binding medium, because that's what it suggests since everything is transforming and perpetually reconfiguring itself. We don't know how time itself has been implicated in that process, but it's likely, and there's real evidence to suggest, recursively speaking, that it's been an almost exponential process. So time hasn't been moving linear since the quote unquote Big Bang, which was, by the way, the Big Bang was more so like a first primordial breath because it wasn't an explosion. It was the first iteration of patterns. But we can talk about that later too. But there's like a very real possibility that our experience or our scale of time is something that has emerged relatively recently, and it's emerging on a exponential, like we said, an exponential scale. So an ever increasing scale, and that would mirror the recursion. So what this means when we're trying to understand our relationship to other galaxies and map our distance to other galaxies, it really does call into question the assumption that we're able to take the properties local to us, like time, space, gravity, and then scale those things out to a universal level. Like, there's no reason to suggest that we should or can or are able to do that, because through this Renexel gradient insight, it's safer to suggest that each galaxy would have its own local laws of space, time, and gravity. So they would be similar in how they are expressed and are formed over time, but they would intrinsically be different in their base properties and characteristics. So the recursive pattern, the self-reference, is the that anchors everything. So everything is self-similar in that it expresses outward from the recursive pattern. But there's no way for us to tell how many degrees of differentiation there are between our galaxy and then the galaxy next to us. And then there's also no way to tell what the distance that we measure when we're looking at these galaxies truly represents. Honestly, it's possible, and it becomes we cannot know. And that's the thing that is going to be a barrier for a lot of people. We can map things with more precision than we ever have, but we will still never be able to define it fully or know exactly. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, but it can also be liberating when you have the right perspective when approaching this. So I'll try to explain this, and it's going to get like very abstract, but it's very possible that when we're looking at these other galaxies, it's not so much a static distance that we're observing as much as it is like an angle of recursive reflection or recursive observation. Because each galaxy is characterized by its own dark matter distribution, it very well may be that the spatial distance we're observing actually represents a difference in recursive configuration, or how differentiated we are from that galaxy at a base temporal level. And so what this would really suggest is something akin to a holographic universe, but I don't really like the word holographic because it has a sort of connotation, and it has a connotation that it can be defined to something that we understand as a holograph or a hologram, whatever, but it cannot be. And if we go back to the core truth dictated by the equations in the claim, then we know that everything is defined as a partial representation of everything else. So when we're looking at these other galaxies, we know we are connected to them fundamentally in some way, shape, or form. But there's a really good chance, just based on the recursive logic and math, that this distance we're observing is more so like a lack of transmission space. Like, there is no dark matter in this void space we're observing, but it's not an actual void space, because we know there's no such thing as nothing. It's more so an anti-pattern. So the distance we're observing reflects how differently configured or developed we are from these outer galaxies. And I'll leave it there. I can't keep going in on this and talking about this, because we do reach a wall where we simply can't understand or define it further. And there very well may be some physics out there and some new observations that would add a lot of insight to this claim and help us better understand what exactly is going on when it comes to the spatial representations we're observing between the galaxies. But right now, it's safe to say that the idea that we can map linear distances out at such an unlimited scale, that shouldn't be able to hold, and there has to be a point where that breaks down. I mean, we know that time itself breaks down. We know that gravity breaks down. And we've observed these RENEX points, these black holes, these singularities, as being entities that defy the laws of our universe. And we call them laws, yet we acknowledge things that can defy those laws. So that itself is a paradox. But within the recursive framework, it's not a paradox because they take the forms they do and they appear as inaccessible to us because that pure, indifferentiated, perfectly coherent state